Aloha, everybody, and welcome to the Hawaii Family Forum Triple F podcast, Faith, Family, and Freedom. I'm your host, Eva Andrade. I'm the president of Hawaii Family Forum, and once again, I'm with my co-host, Jim Hochberg. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Aloha.
Aloha. So today we're going to look at what's happening with abortion across the nation, and when we come back, we're going to jump right in. So let's chat about that.
We recognize that the Texas case does that. It keeps more and more babies alive every single day that it stands, and we're honored to be here as part of the pro-life movement.
This law is about human life, and so a little baby growing inside her mother's womb, when there's a heartbeat the doctor can detect, the doctor cannot take that life in abortion. That's all the bill's about. If there's a heartbeat, there's a life that must be protected.
We believe that the majority of people understand that when there is a heartbeat, or before, I believe that life begins at conception, but at least at that point, it's a human being and worthy of our legal protection and has civil rights.
Because right now, the United States is one of 7 countries, with China and North Korea, that allows abortion all the way up until the moment of birth, well past the point that the baby can feel pain. So we have everything to gain from these judicial decisions. There's really, it can't be worse than it is right now. And so this sort of desperation that we're seeing from the pro-abortion movement, these different, these name-calling techniques and scare tactics, it just goes to show that they know that we're on the cusp of real change, and they're desperate to try and stop it.
And I think the thing about Texas that particularly Democrats are so happy about is they, in addition to this law, they also passed $100 million in alternative to abortion funding. And that's where, as Democrats, we think that life inside and outside the womb is precious, and we want to make sure the women have real choice to have their babies rather than just pay for abortion. So
where we see that women have a lot more options. You know, really abortion, all it does for a woman is it takes away the child inside of her, but it doesn't solve any of her problems. It doesn't solve any of her issues. And so the whole idea that abortion is women's health care is fraud, and we certainly want to come and show all of the life options that are available to women in crisis.
women need real choice. And when you fund abortion and you don't provide those alternatives, you are giving the indication that you think that abortion is the best and only answer for women.
Yeah, so we provide maternity services, adoption services for women that choose that, foster care, temporary care, hosting, lots of arrays of things that we can do both for women and children.
I just think there's so much momentum in the movement right now on the front lines at the pregnancy centers, in state legislatures across the country, and certainly in the hearts and minds of the American people.
So I'm hopeful that most of America will tune in and will recognize that life begins at conception and that it's worth saving. What the Texas Heartbeat Law does is it brings a complete crescendo to this issue and thrusts it into the national stage. So I hope Americans see that. They see that states like Texas can protect law, and then they try to get involved, whether it's with a local pregnancy resource center or advocating for laws like the Texas law in their own home state.
Thanks so much for watching this video. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so you never miss new content from the Daily Signal.
So Jim, I know that when we are doing all of these podcasts, one of the things you said, and I want this on the record, people, so when you send your nasty emails, you can send it to jim@jameshochberglaw.com, that when we did the abortion podcast, we were very disappointed that the numbers of people watching it was pretty low. And we were thinking, why is that? You know, in today's day and age, with what's happening with abortion across the nation, more people should care. More people should want to plug into this issue. So I'm hoping with this show today that all of you watching, that you're going to comment, that you're going to like, that you're going to share, that you're going to subscribe, because it's really important that we stand up for the voices of those who cannot speak for themselves, and those are the babies in the womb. So that's what the show is about today.
Before we go further, let's give folks a reason why this is important.
Okay.
The issue of terminating the life of a baby in the mother's womb is super critical. And there have been a lot of famous people, from Mother Teresa, non-politicians, Mother Teresa, people in media, in entertainment, all that stuff. They understand that when you believe life begins is critical. And if you believe life begins when your mom decides to give birth to you, That's a very different kind of society than a society that believes that life begins at conception or at quickening or whatever other way you want to define it before birth. When a mom wants to give birth to her baby through the whole pregnancy, she doesn't call it my fetus. Only people that want to get abortions have to refer to that baby as a fetus so that abortion doesn't sound as bad as it really is. And every aborted baby missed out on the opportunity to live and develop her or his God-given life. Maybe cancer would have already been solved and healed and gotten away with if that doctor hadn't been aborted before birth, or whatever. But the heartbeat of the country has to make a choice between they're choosing when does life begin. If it begins when the mom says I'll give birth at the 9th month and the last minute of the last hour, that's a scary place for a baby to live.
Well, I tell you what drives me absolutely insane right now, and I know that I've heard from some of you that feel the same way. We are watching every single day while COVID counts of death go up, right? Whatever side of the issue you're on, all of us are inundated with how many people have died today because of COVID.
And it may not even be true.
And well, that's a whole nother show.
That's another show.
Go look at what the podcasts we've done, because we have talked about this. But the point is that if we had a tick that was on the bottom of the television screen on the number of babies that are aborted every single day, and if we had to look at it every single day, maybe people wouldn't have that attitude that you just described. We live in a society today where everything is quick, right? Microwavable food. Everything we want, it has to be quick. We don't want it. When you're doing shows like this, don't do an hour, do half an hour. Every time that something comes up,
you can't
it's
even
like,
go
do it
20
quick.
minutes.
And when we're giving testimony at our state capitol, we're given a 3-minute, maybe a 2-minute, sometimes a 1-minute time limit.
Sometimes they even say, if you're not going to say something different than you wrote, just skip it.
That's right. And so we're in a society now where everything is supposed to be quick. And so people are looking at their pregnancy as something that can be quick.
Very interesting.
That's what I'm thinking. And again, just being inundated with the number of COVID deaths every day, I keep thinking to myself, wow, just imagine for a moment if the numbers on the bottom of the screen reflected the numbers of babies killed every day. So we're all watching what's happening because of the Texas bill that's before the Supreme Court right now.
And that's the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Healthcare.
No, Dobbs is the one coming up December 1st. This is
Correct.
The Texas heartbeat bill.
Well, so that's in a beginning stage. That's not really going to resolve much.
No, it
it's
won't.
Really not.
But the reason that I wanted to start with that one is because when you're talking about whether the baby has a heartbeat, and that's simply what this bill is about. If there is an identifiable heartbeat, we are not going to allow you to kill this child. Not only are we going to not allow you to kill this child, you can report somebody else who tries to kill this child, who has a discernible heartbeat. That's what we're talking about. That cannot even allow people that are pro-choice to understand that we're talking about a life here.
Correct.
We are talking about a life. And what's going to happen is this has caused all of the people across the nation in organizations just like Hawaii Family Forum, and we're part of a network where there's over 40 family policy councils across the nation. And we're all having this conversation because the real question is, can Roe versus Wade be overturned? And if it is overturned...
Or not. That doesn't have to be the alternative outcome.
Well, people that are pro-life want to know, is this the road that is going to stop Roe versus Wade from happening?
I think we did a blog on the Dobbs case, which is further along in the legislative process and in the legal challenge. That's in December 1st. And it's similar. They don't use the heartbeat phraseology for the cutoff on abortions. They use 13 weeks, I think, if I'm right. And what Dobbs says, which the Supreme Court is going to decide, is it constitutional or not, they don't have to overturn the abortion jurisprudence to get there, because the issue in the Dobbs case really is, when Roe v. Wade got decided in 1973, the test word was viability. And all the abortion jurisprudence since then has dealt with the viability of the fetus, the baby outside the mother's womb, as when protections can start attaching to babies not being aborted. What they did in Mississippi is they said, we're going to go with 13 weeks for 3 different reasons. The most interesting to me that I hadn't even thought of before was the United States is one of only 7 countries out of 200 and something on the globe that permit abortions after, gosh, I can't remember, the 15 weeks, I think. And why do we want to be that kind of a barbaric nation with respect to pregnant mothers and babies in the womb compared to all the rest of the countries? That was very, very interesting. But what the Supreme Court in Dobbs is going to have to decide is viability still a good test? That's all they have to decide. If other tests are equally as good because of the advances of science, because of new issues that we've talked about, like surgical abortions after 13 weeks, apparently, according to the lawyers in the Dobbs case in the legislature of Mississippi, result in a exponentially increased risk of physical harm to the mom. And that's another really good reason not to go with viability, which is 26 weeks or something like that.
Well, I tell you what's interesting is when you get into the discussion of abortion, you find, especially here in Hawaii, and I believe this is the case in other states, is that doctors do not want to do abortion. So there's always an access issue. Planned Parenthood, if you go to their sites, you're going to see they're saying not enough doctors. So here in Hawaii, what our legislature is fighting for is for APRNs to also...
Which means?
The Advanced Practice Registered Nurses.
Correct.
To also participate in providing these abortions.
Not to participate, to do the surgical
to be a
procedure.
To be a provider.
We got to talk real.
Passed.
To do the surgical procedure.
And,
a nurse.
And it passed. So here in Hawaii now, APRNs can now do this. And if you read the testimony of Planned Parenthood, they're saying because there's not enough doctors. Interesting.
But not on Oahu, on the neighbor islands.
No, this is across. So
but they were really concerned with the neighbor islands.
Well, of course, because it's so beautiful here. But anyone visiting Hawaii knows, okay, if I want to see the beauty of the neighbor islands, I actually have to pay a couple $100s to fly over there. So if you're a woman who's considering an abortion, it becomes an obstacle if you have to fly to Oahu to have this procedure done. But I want to make this point because, and I've said this in other podcasts, is that even on the issue of assisted suicide, doctors don't want to do it.
Correct.
And so now our next thing in Hawaii in 2022 is they want APRNs to be a provider for assisted suicide.
Correct.
So if you have your medical providers not wanting to do abortions and they're not wanting to do assisted suicide, the question remains for our politicians, why do they think that by just chipping away at the people who are allowed to do it is going to make a difference? Are we going to get to veterinarians? Are we going to get to podiatrists? I mean, when do we get to the point that
retired military medics?
That's a whole nother show. But the point is that, our politicians have to make these decisions, and people in the pews are the ones who vote for politicians. So yes, Jim, we're going to do like we always do in the show.
Absolutely.
We have to take a couple minutes to say that when you go into that ballot box, you got to know how your vote is going to be continued by the person who you put into office. Because when you vote, your vote keeps voting. That's what I tell people in our trainings.
That's true. And if you live in Texas or Mississippi, you had a state legislature voted by the people who live there that were willing to pass a law that Planned Parenthood was going to challenge, that the Supreme Court is going to decide. Why can't we elect people like that here? I want to.
Well, we get that all the time. Every time an election rolls around, people reach out to our C4, which is Hawaii Family Advocates, and they're like, can you tell us who to vote for? And we're like, well, we would, but we hardly have any good people that we could recommend. So everything starts with the person who's watching this, because there might be someone right now who feels like they might be called to run for office. And when you're being called to run for office, there are some qualifications that we'd like to see you have, and Jim and I are going to do a show to talk about that, and that's going to be coming up. So you want to make sure that you subscribe to this channel, because we are going to be talking about things nobody else is talking about here on the islands, and we're going to bring our 20 years of experience to do that. But let's go back to this topic we're talking about. So overturning Roe versus Wade is such a big fear right now.
For some people.
For some people. For others, there's rejoicing. For others, there's wailing and gnashing of teeth. The Guttmacher Institute just released, and this was released on October 28th, they released a report on what would happen if Roe versus Wade is overturned, because everybody's having this discussion. So we want to talk about that, because I've had people stop me and say, oh, if Roe versus Wade is overturned, then Hawaii will not have abortions. And that is not true.
Not at
and
all.
we're going to talk about why that's not true here in the state of Hawaii. So this report, and you want to check the links in the description below, because we're going to provide these links for you.
And we got to say that the Guttmacher Institute is a research arm of Planned Parenthood.
They are. So, and I want to get that out the gate, that this is their report.
Correct.
And what they're saying is that should Roe versus Wade be overturned, 26 states are certain or likely to ban abortion without Roe. And then they list these states. So we've got 51 states, and 26 of them would just immediately, they would be able to ban abortions outright because of their state laws. Okay?
But that's not what's before the Supreme Court. But they can go ahead and make this public relations
Well, yeah,
war.
because see, what's happening is all the states across the nation right now are preparing, good or bad, for a post-Roe world.
Correct.
And so people that are pro-choice, they're preparing for what that would mean, and people that are pro-life are preparing for what that would mean. And so what's happened is, prior to the decision that's going to be made by the Supreme Court, you've got states that have trigger laws. You've got states that have near total bans. You have states that have 6-week bans. They have 8-week bans. And so in the Guttmacher report, they list 21 states and where they're at. These are states like Alabama and Arizona, you know. All right, people in Hawaii, I know that you always say, why can't we be more like, and then you throw out some red state. Well, the only way we're going to become a state like that is if all of us raise our voice to unite and stand on the gospel principles that we have deep within us. That's the only way we're going to make change. But let's talk about Hawaii, because Hawaii was one of the first states to legalize abortion.
Before Roe v. Wade.
Before
Actually,
Roe versus Wade.
legislatively,
Yes.
before Roe v. Wade.
So in 2006, we had a Republican governor who signed into law an abortion expansion bill for here in Hawaii, because our law here in Hawaii said that you had to be in state. And so that was one of the things they wanted to strike, so that you didn't have to be
A resident. You
a
could come here on
resident.
vacation and
Absolutely.
get an abortion.
But what they also did in 2006, and a lot of people don't know this, is they wanted to make sure that enshrined in our law was a woman's right to choose. And so in their introduction, and as all of you know, bills have the certain part that become law, and then they have the introduction, right? So it's
The flowery language
flowery
of
language.
what they're trying to do. Yes.
So this particular...
None of which is often true. Sorry.
Yes. Okay. So in case people want to look, and we're going to have the link for you, this was House Bill 1242, House Draft 1, and it was Act 35. And this is what they have in their preamble there. They talk about in 1970, 3 years before the United States Supreme Court's decision in Roe versus Wade, Hawaii became one of the first states to repeal its law criminalizing abortion. In addition, Article 1, Section 6, and this is where Jim's hackles are going to start to go up, of the Hawaii State Constitution includes an explicit right to privacy.
We have 2 in our state constitution.
And so they quote this right to privacy, and they say the right of the people to privacy is recognized and shall not be infringed without the showing of a compelling state interest. The legislature shall take affirmative steps to implement this right. Then they say, to make clear that the right to reproductive choice is protected as a fundamental right under the Hawaii State Constitution, the Committee of the Whole explained during the 1978 Constitutional Convention that, quote, by amending the Constitution to include a separate and distinct privacy right, it is the intent of your committee to ensure that privacy is treated as a fundamental right for purposes of constitutional analysis. This privacy concept encompasses the notion that in certain highly personal and intimate matters, the individual should be afforded freedom of choice absent a compelling state interest.
So do you think that applies to a decision on a vaccination?
That is something for certain attorneys who might want to ask that question to come up. And so
But let's look back in history, because this bill passed in April of 2006. The legislative session, when it got introduced, started in January of 2006. The year before that, when the legislature was working on what they're going to do in the session starting in January 2006, was 2005. If we all remember, in January of 2005, George W. Bush was inaugurated for the second term. And his administration wanted to limit funding for abortion. And that's where this was coming from, to make sure they couldn't make abortion illegal and all the nefarious things that all Republicans like to do when they're in control of power, according to the Guttmacher Institute. So remember, this happened following up on George W. Bush's second inauguration.
Yes, and so in that same act, they established that the state shall not deny or interfere with a female's right to choose or obtain an abortion of a non-viable fetus or an abortion that is necessary to protect the life or health of the female. I wonder if they're going to go back in now and call that a birthing person.
Well, I was wondering if they're going to go back in after the Supreme Court in the Dobbs case says viability isn't the right test. It should be whatever word they pick instead. See if we can get them to amend that to change viability to whatever the new word is.
Well, you know what?
Not going to happen. Slim chance and a fat chance.
We may have to do a whole nother show on definitions, because that's the thing, right? I mean, I have been in the presence of pastors that have disagreed on viability. Let me tell you, it's scary.
Well,
so this is even
tough.
a theological question, depending on what church you go to. But as Christians, we believe that each and every child is the fingerprint and handprint of a living God.
Absolutely.
That's what we believe. And so we're going to continue to fight
so
for that.
Even in Roe v. Wade, when they used the term viability, Justice Blackmun, who wrote the opinion, who, by the way, handed me my law school diploma here. He was our guest superstar the UH Law School thought. Anyway, in his decision, he said viability is something that is subject to scientific improvement. So they knew in '73 that that word was going to move.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is a discussion that's not going to go away. In fact, I think it's going to deepen as these court cases begin to move through the Supreme Court. But here in Hawaii, what that means is that if Roe versus Wade is overturned, we are still going to have abortion here because of the law that was passed in 2006.
And people need to understand, what Roe v. Wade said is, no state can interfere with a woman's right to abort a baby before viability. That's what it said. So if they change the viability standard to something else, the line might change, but there have always been times that abortion wasn't possible, and there have been cases about them. The partial birth abortion thing that went around and around for 5 or 10 years. So abortion on demand is what the public believes is the law, but it really isn't. Viability is the standard. And the issue with viability is why, and I'm 100% pro-life, but the argument is, why if a woman that gets pregnant finds out before viability that she can't be or doesn't want to be or whatever, why can't, before it's even viable, she have an abortion? But so if the Supreme Court in the Dobbs case allows abortions to be restricted before viability, it's not going to change anything in Hawaii.
I'd like to know what you guys think. For all of you watching right now, I want you to comment below on what you think viability means. And maybe Jim and I will talk about some of your answers, because I think that it's going to show how people are looking at this issue, which is a really important one. And I want to go back to a point that Jim made earlier, because in this Guttmacher report, they end with this, and it goes to what you said. It is also important to remember that Roe would not have to be overturned entirely to start the process of activating some trigger laws.
That's true.
If the court weakens or undermines existing federal constitutional protections, that may be enough momentum for states to start implementing these laws.
And it depends on who we elect in Hawaii. If we keep electing the same pro-abortion people we've been electing forever, nothing's going to change.
And that's why we need you. Please make sure that you visit hawaiifamilyforum.org for more information about what we do here in the community. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, share it, comment, hit that notification button so you'll know every time a new episode is uploaded, and check out hawaiifamilyadvocates.com, which is our C4 organization. They're going to be doing a lot of things during the election. So stay plugged in for faith, family, and freedom. We'll see you next time. Mahalo, everybody.
Aloha.